So what is the FARC? Today, Colombia's government is a republic with separation of powers almost identical to the US. But in 1948, the two traditional parties, the Liberalist and the Conservative parties, were in disagreement. The Conservative Party wanted a strong centralized government and alliance with the Roman Catholic Church. Liberals wanted decentralization, state, not church control. This should sound familiar from what we learned earlier in the course. The assassination of the Liberal candidate was the catalyst for a period of 10 years of civil war called La Violencia from 1948 to 1958. This is where the Liberal Party kind of lost control, and General Gustavo Rojas eventually seized power in 1953. Meanwhile, the Communist Party was gaining support. Gustavo offered amnesty to the warring factions if they laid down their arms, but the Communists resisted and set up guerrilla units to fight off Rojas and the other factions that were fighting for control of the country. These guerrilla units are what we know today as the FARC, Fuerzas Armadas Revolucionarias de Colombia, Ejército del Pueblo, or the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, the People's Army. The FARC is one of the world's richest guerrilla armies. They currently net around $5 to $6 million a year and one of the most well-established drug trafficking rings in history. Reportedly, the FARC supplies 50% of the entire world's cocaine and more than 60% of the cocaine that enters the U.S. The FARC claims to represent the lower agrarian class of Colombia, and they oppose what they see as a growing imperialism in the country. They've hindered many of the country's globalization and privatization efforts, and they have hindered the U.S. influence. Current estimates are that there are around 8,000 to 12,000 members of the FARC scattered mostly throughout the southeastern parts of Colombia, mostly in the jungles. The FARC is considered a terrorist group by most countries, including Colombia and the U.S., but they still have factions, as you can see, all over the world. Their tactics include bombing, murder, mortar attacks, landmines, gas bombings, kidnapping, extortion, hijacking, as well as your guerrilla warfare and even conventional military action. The FARC typically stays within their territories that they control, but they will venture out to launch opportunistic attacks on military units to obtain weapons and supplies. They frequently kidnap for extortion and political leverage, including the kidnapping of Ingrid Betancourt, a Colombian presidential candidate in 2002. These guys don't mess around. They didn't release her for 6.5 years. They simply execute opponents or suspected informers, and the current death toll due to the FARC is over 220,000. An interesting side note on the FARC is the population of women and young girls within its ranks, but not just any women. Studies have actually been done on the phenomenon of the FARC, including attractive women within its forces, as you can see in the following slides. Keeping with that tradition, the FARC even asked Miss Universe to advocate for them at recent peace talks. So aside from running around the jungle with a bunch of pretty women, what is the main force keeping the FARC going? No surprise here, it's economic disparity. The extremely unequal distribution of wealth in Colombia has led to a history of a society that lacks security. Lack of security in every facet of human existence. Insecurity in land, employment, access to healthcare and education, even housing. The champagne glass effect we were taught in high school is a perfect example of Colombia's economy, except the bottom stem of Colombia's glass is even more out of proportion than depicted in my example. The upper echelon enjoys all the modern first world conveniences and relaxes on the beach while there are people starving in the streets. Even though the past two presidents have focused on tourism, instituted training and employment programs, as well as farming subsidies and state assistance, the poverty level of Colombia has been stuck around 40%. In remote places, the average income is lower than $47 a month, giving it one of the highest poverty levels in Latin America. The farming subsidies I previously mentioned are similar to those the U.S. employed during the Great Depression, where the rich continued to get rich while the poor were delegated to the worst soil and denied grant assistance, which caused further unrest and demonstrations. One researcher compared it to the knight and peasant fief system of medieval times. Many of these programs are now actually under investigation. In 2002, President Alvaro Uribe was elected, vowing to defeat the FARC. He was re-elected in 2006 and since then has launched an unprecedented campaign, backed by U.S. aid, against the FARC. Regardless of the questionable farming subsidies, Uribe seems to have established a well-structured social assistance network, and Colombia is currently boasting the fastest economic growth and the lowest inflation rate in Latin America. Perhaps these factors are contributing to the increasing desertion levels the FARC has been experiencing in recent years. Public support is currently down and morale is low, according to inside sources. These unfavorable conditions for the FARC most undoubtedly have contributed to its willingness to participate in negotiations of peace in the more recent years. Since 2012, peace talks have been ongoing in Cuba between the Colombian government and the FARC. In January of this year, the current president, Juan Manuel Santos, announced that they were closer than ever to securing peace. As of July 22, 2015, 3 out of 5 points have been agreed upon: land reform, political participation, and illicit narcotics. The 2 remaining points of discussion are rights and reparations for the victims of the conflicts and the disarmament of the rebels. However, Santos's unrelenting opposition to negotiate on these last 2 points may derail the current peace talks. Experts predict that with declining popular support for a peace accord, the longer Santos waits to take action to de-escalate the conflict, the less likely a final peace agreement will be reached. On July 8th, the FARC announced a new 1-month unilateral ceasefire effective July 20th. But this will be insufficient for reducing long-term instability for 2 reasons. First, even if the FARC upholds the ceasefire, the 6th ceasefire since peace talks have begun, 1 month will not be enough time to reach an agreement on the remaining 2 issues, as it has taken nearly 3 years to reach a consensus on the other 3 points. Second, Santos's July 12th announcement that his government would scale down military action to speed up the negotiation process does not explicitly promise, as a bilateral ceasefire would, that the military will not attack FARC rebels or resources. Given that an agreement will likely not be reached within a month, the only strategic option left to the FARC commanders is to plan for a resumption of hostilities. So when the ceasefire expires, Colombia will be right back where she started, unstable with a prolonged risk to civilians and the destruction of its recently developed critical infrastructure.